Thank you for the invitation to speak about Judaism and sexuality, myths and realities. I do not have anything to disclose. Okay. Jews are not a monolithic group. There exists great diversity regarding culture, affiliation, and ethnicity, which greatly inform attitudes, beliefs, and practice. There are three major religious branches within Judaism: Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. The extent to which the affiliation and Jewish identity are relevant in the context of sexual health will likely be informed by adherence to both the spirit and the letter of Jewish law and tradition. So therefore, I'm going to present a more traditional approach, and I'm going to focus on the three core values of sexual sanctity, of modesty, and family purity. So let's start with the first myth, that sex is only for the purpose of procreation. Judaism highly values sexuality, regarding it as a divine gift and a holy obligation, both for the purposes of procreation, but also for pleasure and for marital intimacy, and only in the context and in the framework of a committed and monogamous marriage. Judaism is very relational and rejects celibacy, as it is not good for man to be alone. So there's no value for priests or for having any kind of hierarchy of man who does not marry and does not have sex. Now, the development of Judaism as the oldest monotheistic religion, close to 4,000 years ago, began as a relationship with the recognition of the patriarch Abraham that there is only one God, and that worshiping other gods, as was done in other pagan religions, that worshiping other gods would be a form of betrayal. Judaism is based on commitment. Responsibilities, obligations, and commitments are key components. And the relationship or the covenant between God and the Jewish people is based on mutual commitment and obligation, exclusive devotion to one God, adherence to positive and negative commandments, such as prayer, Sabbath observance, and giving charity, are expected in return for God's protection, for his love and his compassion. Jewish marriage, which is meant to include mutual love and commitment, mirrors this relationship, as is described passionately in King Solomon's Song of Songs in the verse, "I am for my beloved, and my beloved is for me." Under the bridal canopy, the ketubah, or the marital contract, secures the woman her shelter, clothing, and her onah, which is her sexual pleasure. That's the legal part of the ceremony, which also speaks to the core value of exclusivity and sanctity of marriage with the words, "You are betrothed unto me." That's what the groom says to the bride. The blessings under the chuppah speak to the emotional component. We wish for the bride and the groom to delight in one another emotionally and physically, and that speaks to the marital intimacy, to that value. So the next myth is that modesty rules dictate that Jews have sex through a hole in the sheet or with clothes on. And not only is that untrue, the Talmud records an opinion that during sexual relationships, there must be a closeness of flesh. But modesty is a core value, as is stated in Micah, "What the Lord requires of you, only to do justice and to love goodness and to walk modestly with your God." Modesty refers not only to dress, but also behavior. It includes privacy, dignity, regulation, and restraint. There is a saying that says one should sanctify oneself with what is permitted. In all that is pleasurable and permissible, there are also boundaries and constraints. Couples are prohibited from having sex when one or both partners is drunk, angry, or demanding. Sex can be spontaneous and playful, or mindful and intentional. Several sources caution men to assure their wives' pleasure. Married couples can do whatever they want sexually, as long as it is consensual and mutually desired, and as long as it's during a time that they're allowed to be together. Which brings us to the next core value, which is family purity. The timing of sexual contact between husband and wife is governed by a set of biblical laws known as Taharat HaMishpacha, literally family purity. Taharat HaMishpacha requires that husbands and wives abstain from any physical or sexual contact for the duration of a woman's menstrual period, plus an additional 7 clean days. And at the end of this approximate 12-day separation, this additional 7 days, by the way, are not rabbinic, are not biblical. They were added later in the rabbinic portion of Judaism. At the end of this approximate 12-day separation, a woman immerses herself in a ritual bath known as a mikvah. And after that, the couple is permitted to resume relations. And that, of course, leads us to the next myth, which is that adherence to family purity laws leads to better sexual satisfaction. Well, in fact, it's complicated. While these laws have been idealized to enhance marital passion and intimacy, many couples find that they can be a source of strain and pressure. In 2009, my colleagues and I published the results of the first study to investigate the sexual lives of 400 Orthodox women. Our team constructed a survey to allow us to determine whether and to what extent adherence to the laws of family purity are associated with sexual satisfaction for women. Amongst many other findings, we learned that attitudes towards mikvah vary greatly, as well as level of adherence to the rules. While many women endorsed mikvah as both emotionally and spiritually enhancing, others found the mikvah experience and the surrounding rules invasive and a source of marital tension. And this is certainly important clinically when couples go to counseling. We also found that partners can face conflict when there are discrepancies between them in the desire to adhere to these laws. And finally, we found from our sample, and this is backed up by the experience of sex therapies, colleagues and myself working with the population, is that premarital education that emphasizes the Jewish laws but does not offer sufficient sexual education and information leaves couples unprepared for marriage. Which brings us to the next myth, which is that couples are well prepared for marital sexual relations. Well, in our study, we reported that 40% of the 400 study subjects stated that they were not well prepared for their wedding night, and 64.5% said that they did not even know the basics of sexual intercourse. Many reported not knowing about arousal or orgasm or where their clitoris was. Fortunately, since then, this is an old study, things have changed a lot, and it's now very common for premarital instructors to provide basic sexual counseling. Still, the anticipation that intercourse take place right after the wedding, when most couples, according to Jewish law, did not have any previous sexual contact, many did not have any physical contact, often leaves newlyweds experiencing cognitive dissonance. And as a result, unconsummated marriage is a commonly recognized clinical presentation of newly married Orthodox Jewish couples. My colleagues and I have published clinical papers on the phenomenon of unconsummated marriage in this population. A recent qualitative study of Orthodox Jewish women's early marital experiences refers to this phenomenon as the quick shift. But the idea that Orthodox don't engage in any premarital sex at all is yet another myth. And it's important to explore clinically how these premarital experiences shape sexual development and later sexual functioning. For example, it's not uncommon that Orthodox Jewish youth are taught that keeping the Jewish laws of not being alone together with a member of the opposite sex, known as yichud, and not making any physical contact at all, known as being shomer negia, is all the sexual education that's necessary until marriage. There are even beliefs that these laws protect against sexual harassment or abuse, which they do not. While I have emphasized Judaism's positive approach to marital sex, There are cultural messages and traditions that can create challenges in the development of healthy sexuality individually as well as relationally. Ultra-Orthodox societies are extremely insular, and modesty guidelines restrict access to members of the opposite sex. Young men may be instructed, usually are instructed, that masturbation is a grave sin, creating an existential developmental conflict between their spiritual side and their sexual self. They're instructed to guard their eyes to avoid arousal, while young women are instructed to dress in a modest way to protect men from sexual arousal. Men are encouraged to marry early, as this will save them from sin, while women are often encouraged to fulfill her husband's sexual needs so that he does not sin. This can create feelings of, for women, objectification, resentment, and lack of autonomy. In some cases, women are told that they're not allowed to say no, and this creates sexual trauma. These messages can be destructive to men as well, because they perpetuate the belief that they're not in control of their sexuality. So sex therapists who use sensate focus interventions, for example, may confront a great deal of anxiety in these couples when instructed in sensual activities without intercourse, because they might fear the men that they, and the women, that they won't be able, that the man won't be able to control himself, or that he might ejaculate outside of the vagina. It may be important to work with clergy so that the couple feels that you understand and respect their worldview. And sometimes clergy can be educated as to the importance of sex without intercourse and the need for women to experience sex consensually. In more modern Orthodox societies, gender interaction is common. So the belief that sexual education does not apply to religious youth and the reluctance to offer such discussion in schools leaves curious young people vulnerable to easily accessible but unreliable, unrealistic, and culturally dissonant sources such as pornography. Not providing sexual education prevents access to fundamentally important information about LGBTQ identity, sexual responsibility, and reproductive health. It is important to acknowledge and address that there may be conflicting feelings between values and desires, and that sexual choices that are made should be informed, consensual, intentional, and ethical, even if not following the letter of the Jewish law. Reliable information and open discussion must be available in order to teach about boundaries, consent, and autonomy, and heal feelings of sexual shame, sexual splitting, and loneliness. I'm going to end with a quick story from the Talmud. And this well-known Talmudic story relates how the sage, Rav Kahana, hid under the bed of the great scholar, Rav, while the latter was engaged in intimate behavior with his wife. Rav Kahana was discovered by Rav, who ordered him to leave. Rav Kahana, who was surprised to hear Rav engaging playfully with his wife as though they were newlyweds, responded, "But it is Torah, and I must learn." So here's the good news. There is more dialogue today about sexuality in Judaism and the importance of learning about sex. There are more books and podcasts on intimacy and sexuality geared towards the Orthodox community. I want to thank you for your attention.